Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, we'll have the latest on campus protests across the country and some of the remarks President Biden made today about the issue. And in Maryland, authorities say they have recovered another victim's body following the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge.
And we are trending soggy to end the week. Your first alert forecast coming up as Mountain News at 5:30 starts now.
Dedicated to southern and eastern Kentucky, this is WYMT Mountain News at 5:30.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley. President Biden says pro-Palestinian campus protests have not prompted him to rethink his Middle East policies. His first public comments on the topic come after police officers broke up a pro-Palestinian encampment overnight on the campus of UCLA, and police in Portland cleared out protesters from the State University Library. CBS's Bradley Blackman reports from New York, where officers remain outside several universities there.
Students at Portland State University were told to shelter in place Thursday as police cleared out the library, which had been occupied by protesters. Police say they found tools, improvised weapons, and paint balloons. And this is what remains after police cleared out the pro-Palestinian encampment on the campus of UCLA. Overnight, officers in riot gear moved in, ripping apart the barricades that had been set up. More than 100 protesters were arrested.
We need to keep protesting, and that's the only way change will be made, right? By resisting the status quo. So.
As the day wore on, officers continued to make arrests in areas outside the encampment.
We are still seeing the resistance on the far end to my right.
As protests on college campuses nationwide escalate, President Biden spoke out, condemning the violence.
Breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest.
At George Washington University in D.C., there were dueling protests between protesters who were against the war in Gaza.
Humanity wins when we bring them home.
And pro-Israel demonstrators who want the focus to be on the release of the hostages. Bradley Blackburn, CBS News, New York.
According to the Associated Press, the protests have now resulted in about 2,000 arrests nationwide so far. A student at the University of Texas at Austin was interviewed about the protests earlier today. Elijah Kalenberg says Governor Greg Abbott started sending in state troopers to suppress peaceful protests. He says other students are joining in on the protests because they saw the civil liberties of their fellow students being suppressed.
And so because we see such crackdowns, many more students who might otherwise not be the most knowledgeable on what's occurring on the ground in Israel and Palestine will join in. And that, I think, will be the spark that allows these protests to grow bigger than anyone would have ever imagined.
Many student protesters opposing Israel's military attacks in Gaza say they want their schools to stop funneling endowment money to Israeli companies. Two of America's intelligence chiefs appeared on Capitol Hill testifying about a number of security threats facing the United States. Their testimony ranged from the war in Ukraine, which they say won't end anytime soon, to the protests about the war in Gaza that are affecting college campuses across America. CBS's Skylar Henry has more on that from Capitol Hill.
The heads of the U.S. intelligence agencies appeared on Capitol Hill and told lawmakers China, Russia, and Iran are increasingly working together against American interests.
China is working to develop its own form of multilateralism while deepening its relationship with Russia and Iran in particular.
Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, testified that China and Russia are making preparations for cyber attacks on the U.S. in case there is a war with America.
Both China and Russia effectively trying to pre-position themselves in ways that would allow them to conduct those kinds of attacks.
She said the vulnerabilities could, in most cases, be easily prevented.
And in virtually all of the attacks we've seen against U.S. critical infrastructure, cyber actors took advantage of default or weak passwords, unpatched known vulnerabilities, and poorly secured network connections to launch relatively simple attacks.
The intelligence chiefs say Iran is taking advantage of Israel's war with Hamas to expand its influence throughout the Middle East.
How the current conflict between Hamas and Israel is resolved is likely to determine regional dynamics for decades.
While Israel's war with Hamas has stirred tensions around the world, the intelligence chiefs say the college protests happening around the country aren't being stoked by misinformation on the internet, at least not yet.
Well, I would expect other countries to take advantage of the opportunity and use it as part of influence operations, but we'll continue to monitor that.
They say disinformation campaigns centered around the presidential election are in full swing. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
Some Republican lawmakers also disagree with the Biden administration's plan to allow some Palestinian refugees into the U.S., saying it could make America less safe. However, Haynes said that in her experience, the vetting of potential refugees was very thorough.
We are tracking some more dry and warm weather on this Thursday evening. A live look from Southwest Virginia from UVA Wise. Plenty of sunshine over in Wise County. That current temperature up to 79 degrees. But most of us right now, check this out, in the middle to upper 80s. We are toasty on this Thursday, up to 85 in Pikeville, 87 for Jackson, and 88 degrees for Manchester. Also in Harlan County at this hour. Up on the radar, tracking some more dry weather, all thanks to high pressure, and that will keep us calm to go into Thursday evening, but those rain chances are not far away, so be sure to enjoy the calm weather this evening. Those temperatures stay mild in the middle to upper 70s, and most of us wake up in the middle 60s by Friday morning. Also notice those clouds increase overnight as that next weather system is knocking on the door, and we are tracking a busy weather pattern by this weekend. Also moving into next week as rounds of rain are on the way. The good news, no severe storms, but we are soggy at times tomorrow, also for Derby weekend and into next week. All those details coming up in just a little bit. Steve?
Cameron, thank you. President Biden is calling U.S. ally Japan xenophobic because of its position on immigration. The president made the remark during a fundraiser in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday. He argued that Japan, along with Russia and China, would perform better economically if the countries embraced immigration. President Biden pointed to immigration as one reason why the U.S. economy is growing. A California judge has denied a request from one of former President Donald Trump's ex-election lawyers to reactivate his law license. Judge Yvette Rowland rejected John Eastman's request following her recommendation last month that he be disbarred. Rowland wrote in her decision that he, quote, fails to demonstrate that he no longer presents a threat to the public. The former lawyer said he wants to continue to represent clients and pay his own legal bills. A group of senators are trying to stop more longer distance flights at D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. The FAA bill released this week includes a proposal that would add 5 daily round-trip slots to destinations beyond 1,250 miles out of the D.C. area. According to the bill, the change would be more convenient for lawmakers because Reagan is the closest airport to D.C. But some Democratic senators are pushing for an amendment to remove that section from the legislation. A funeral procession was held for Officer William Alden Elliott today in Newtown, North Carolina. Elliott and 3 other law enforcement officers were killed in Monday's shooting in Charlotte. Collectively, the 4 men are leaving 8 children behind. Elliott served as an officer with the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction. Authorities in Maryland have recovered the body of the 5th victim at the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse site. The Unified Command identified the victim as 49-year-old construction worker Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez. According to the release, investigators recovered his body from inside a red truck. The Key Bridge collapsed in March after a cargo vessel slammed into it. The state of Maryland is set to receive a $350 million insurance payment for the bridge collapse. The payment would come from the Chubb Insurance Company and represents the maximum limit of the policy it had on the bridge. That's according to a report from the Washington Post. The payment comes ahead of any plans for reconstructing the bridge, which could be years away. So far, 3,000 tons of wreckage and debris have been removed from the site. Coming up on Mountain News at 5:30, a new study says more than half of workers think they are behind where they should be with their retirement savings. More on the power of making every penny count.
Plus, we are dodging some showers for your weekend plans. More details on those rain chances after this break.